The fog comes off the harbor at 4 in the morning, and it smells like rust and low tide, and Astrid is counting her own heartbeat because it's the only number left that's hers. 41, 42, 43. She is standing on a wooden block that has held grain sacks and fish crates, and twice this winter people. Her wrists are bound in front of her with rope thinner than the cord she used to tie her ledgers shut. She notices that. She notices everything. It's the one thing they haven't taken. The auctioneer is a barrel-chested man named Hask Oren, and he has a voice like a saw going through wet wood, and he is saying her name to a crowd of 40, maybe 50 men in wool coats, and none of them are looking at her face. She is 23 years old. She has small ink stains on the side of her right index finger that will not wash out no matter how hard the auction house women scrubbed her last night. Because 4 years of copying tax ledgers for the East Market Library leaves a mark deeper than soap. Her brother is not here. That is the detail she keeps returning to. The way her mind keeps returning to a column that doesn't sum. Dallin owes 1,100 crowns to a man named Vance Holloway, and Vance Holloway is standing at the front of the crowd in a coat the color of a bruise, and Dallin is not here, and that is wrong. That is a missing entry. That is 1,100 crowns, Hask Oren says, or the girl works it off in the Holloway house. Bidding opens at 400. Someone in the crowd laughs, not unkindly, just a man amused by the weather of someone else's ruin. Astrid does not cry. She has already done that, twice, in the dark of the holding cell until it stopped helping. Now she stands with her chin up because a librarian's assistant learns that posture from shelving books, too high for her, reaching, never quite tall enough. And you learn to make your spine do the work your height won't. 400 crowns. A man near the front bids it without taking his eyes off his own gloves. The fog rolls. Somewhere behind her a gull screams once and goes quiet, and that's the sensory detail she'll remember for the rest of her life. Not the rope, not the cold, that gull, and then nothing, like the world deciding to hold its breath with her. Vance Holloway raises 2 fingers. 500. He says it like he's bored. Like he already owns the outcome, the way he owns the paper that put her here. And that is the threshold. That is the second before the rest of her life splits in 2. And Astrid, who has balanced other men's books for 4 years without ever once being wrong, stands on a damp board in the freezing dark and waits to be bought by the man her brother owes, and does not yet understand that the debt itself is the first lie in a much longer one. She does not know his name yet. She will not know it for almost a full minute, in fact, though she'll spend the rest of her life feeling like she should have known it. The second the crowd went silent. It starts with the crowd going silent, not all at once. In a wave, the way water goes still right before something large moves under it. Men who had been muttering bids stop muttering. Hask Oren saw a blade voice catch his mid-syllable, and Astrid, who has learned in 11 hours of captivity not to hope for anything, feels the hope anyway, hot and humiliating, climbing up her throat before she can stop it. A man is walking through the crowd. He's tall in a way that doesn't need announcing. The crowd parts before he's close enough to ask them to. He wears no crown, no chain of office, nothing gold. Just a dark gray coat with the collar turned up against the fog, and boots that have walked through worse mud than this Quay. The only thing marking him is a ring on his left hand, plain iron, and the way 3 armed men trail 2 steps behind him without being told where to stand. His eyes are pale, not blue, not gray, somewhere unsettled between the two, like weather that hasn't decided yet. That's his detail, the one she'll come back to. Eyes the color of a sky before it commits to a storm. 1,100 crowns, he says. Not a question. Hask Oren actually stammers. Your Grace, the bidding is at 5. 1,100. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The Quay is already so quiet, Astrid can hear her own pulse in her bound wrists, paid in full. Now. Vance Holloway turns, slow like a man who has just smelled smoke in a building he thought was his. King Tristan. He says it carefully, the way you'd handle a knife you weren't sure was yours to pick up. This is a private debt, a market transaction. It was. Tristan doesn't look at Holloway. He looks at Astrid once, and it lasts perhaps 2 seconds. And in those 2 seconds, she understands she is being assessed, and not in the way the crowd has been assessing her all morning. He's not looking at her like merchandise. He's looking at her like a sentence he's reading for the second time, checking he understood it right. It isn't anymore. A bag of coin hits the auction table. Astrid hears it land. The specific weight of it, the dull clack of crowns through leather, a sound she has only ever heard described in ledgers, and never once in person. 1,100 crown sounds, it turns out, exactly like a door closing. Holloway's jaw works. Your Grace is generous with a stranger's debt. My Grace, Tristan says, doesn't explain himself to moneylenders on a public quay. A pause. Just long enough to be a blade and not a slap. Cut her loose. Hask-Oren cuts the rope himself, hands shaking slightly, and Astrid's wrists come free into the cold air, and she does not know what to do with them. They hang at her sides like things she's borrowed. She should say thank you. She knows she should say thank you. Instead, what comes out of her, raw and stupid and entirely her own fault, is, why? Tristan's brow lifts, very slightly. Like he hadn't expected the question and likes it more for that. Why what? Why, me? Her voice doesn't shake, which surprises her more than anything else this morning. There were 2 others on the block before me. You didn't buy either of them. Something moves behind those weather, uncommitted eyes. Not quite a smile. No, he agrees. I didn't. He doesn't answer the actual question. He turns instead, coat snapping once in the wind off the water, and one of his men steps forward with a cloak, wool, undyed, smelling faintly of cedar from wherever it's been stored, and drapes it over her shoulders without asking. The weight of it nearly buckles her knees. She has been cold for 11 hours, and hadn't let herself notice until the cold was taken away. Come to the keep, Tristan says, already walking. You'll want food before you decide whether to thank me or curse me. She stands there one more second, the cloak heavy and warm and smelling of someone else's storeroom, and thinks, that wasn't an answer. And underneath that thought, quieter, the one she won't say out loud for weeks. That was a man who already knew exactly who I was before he walked onto this quay. She follows him anyway. Of course she follows him. What else does a woman do, freed from a debt that was never hers, except walk toward the only person on the quay who looked at her like a question worth keeping? The keep smells like wood smoke and tallow and old stone, and somewhere under that, faintly, like the lavender they hang in the linen presses, and Astrid stands in the doorway of a guest chamber larger than the room she shared with her brother for 19 years, and does not know where to put her hands. A woman named Bry Castellan runs the household. Older. Broad-shouldered, with a long pale scar along her jaw that she's never once explained, and that everyone has stopped asking about. And Bry looks Astrid over like she's evaluating livestock, and then, unexpectedly, smiles. You'll do, Bry says. Do for what? That's the question, isn't it? Bry sets down a tray. Bread, soft cheese, a bowl of something with steam rising off it that Astrid's stomach answers before her mind does. His Grace didn't say. His Grace rarely says. Is that normal? Buying strangers off a debt block? Bry's mouth does something complicated. No, she says, and leaves it there. And Astrid understands she will get nothing further from this woman today. She eats. She sleeps, eventually, in a bed so soft it feels like another kind of captivity. The kind you don't want to escape from, and that thought alone keeps her awake an extra hour out of sheer suspicion of herself. In the morning, she finds Tristan in a long room lined with shelves, ledgers stacked in towers that lean like drunk men, and 4 clerks standing around looking the way men look when a problem has gotten bigger than their competence. It doesn't balance, one of them is saying. We've checked it 3 times, Your Grace. The grain levy from the eastern holds doesn't show me. Astrid steps closer before she's decided to. It's instinct, pure animal instinct of a different kind than fear. The same instinct that used to pull her hand toward a ledger left open on the library counter. The itch of an error sitting unsolved in the world. "May I?" she says, and 4 men turn to stare at her like the furniture has spoken. Tristan doesn't look surprised. That's the first thing she notices. Under the surprise of everyone else in the room, his face stays level, almost amused. Like he expected this exact moment to happen, and was only waiting to see how long it would take. "Go ahead," he says. She crosses to the table. The numbers are a mess of someone's hand, columns that don't square, an exchange rate applied inconsistently between the 3rd entry and the 9th. It takes her 4 minutes. "Your steward converted silver to crown weight using last autumn's rate," she says. "It changed in midwinter. Here." She points. "And here. The levy isn't short. It's recorded wrong. You're owed 40 crowns more than this says, not less." Silence. One of the clerks makes a small sound like he's been struck. Tristan studies the ledger. Then her, then the ledger again. "You did that in your head." "I did that on paper, in 4 minutes, because I was taught to, and because it isn't difficult if you know where to look. It's been difficult for 2 days. You weren't looking for the right thing." She hears herself say it and thinks, "There it is. That's the tone that got Dallin calling me insufferable since I was 9. Tian braces for the room to turn cold around her honesty. Instead, Tristan laughs. Once, short, like it surprised him too. "No," he agrees. "I wasn't. That's the first crack. She doesn't know it yet for what it is. She only knows that something in the room's temperature shifts, the way it shifts when a debt clears, when a column finally sums. He offers her a position on the spot. Clerk to the keep's accounts, paid wage, her own room, the freedom to leave whenever she chooses. "Why?" she says again, same word as the Quay. She can't seem to stop asking it. "Because you're good at something I need," Tristan says, "and because I don't enjoy watching competence go to waste on a debt block." A beat. His eyes do the storm-deciding thing again. "Those are 2 different reasons. I'd think about which one bothers you more." She doesn't have an answer for that. She takes the position anyway. 3 weeks pass the way water finds the lowest point in a field, without announcing itself, just quietly, persistently, filling space she didn't know was empty. She is good at the work. She is, in fact, better than good. Within 10 days, she's caught 2 more errors that cost the keep nothing, because she found them first, and the clerks who once stared at her like furniture now bring her their columns before they bring them to anyone else. There's a particular pleasure in that, plain and unglamorous, the pleasure of being correct in a way no one can argue with. Numbers don't care that she was on an auction block 3 weeks ago. Numbers don't flinch. People do, though. People flinch. The bought girl. She hears one of the kitchen staff say, not unkindly, just factually, the way you'd say, the baker's daughter or the man with the limp. She doesn't correct it. What would she correct it to? The girl he paid for twice and never explained why. That's not shorter. That's not better. Tristan keeps his distance in a way that feels deliberate, which is its own kind of confusing. He's there at the long table some mornings reviewing levies with her, close enough that she can smell wood smoke and leather, and, underneath, something sharper like cedar and cold iron, and he asks her opinion on things he clearly already understands better than he lets on. He's testing something. She doesn't know what. He never touches her, not even the brief, careless touch of handing over a ledger. He always sets things down on the table between them, like there's a line he's drawn and is determined not to cross by accident. She finds that more unsettling than if he'd simply ignored her. You watch him. Bry says one evening, setting down stew with the same brisk efficiency she does everything. Don't. I don't know what you mean. You do. Bry's scar catches the firelight, pale against her jaw. He's not unkind. He's also not free to want things the way other men want things. Mind the difference. Astrid doesn't ask what that means. She files it away the way she files an unbalanced entry. Not solved, just noted, waiting for more information. The information arrives on a Thursday, in the shape of Vance Holloway, standing in the keep's outer courtyard like he has every right to be there, in his bruise-colored coat, smiling at her like they share a secret. Astrid. He says her name like he's tasting it. You look well fed. Her stomach drops straight through the floor. What are you doing here? Conducting business. Your king owes several merchants along the eastern docks, and I represent their interests now. He steps closer, and she steps back before she's decided to, an old animal calculation her body makes faster than her mind does. You should know, your brother's debt. It wasn't the only thing he signed. What does that mean? It means, Holloway says, and his smile doesn't move, doesn't even flicker, that men like your king don't pay 1,100 crowns twice for a librarian's clerk out of charity. Ask yourself why he keeps you so close and touches you so little. Ask yourself what you're actually worth to him. He tilts his head. And when you've worked out the answer, and you will, you're good with numbers, come find me. I'll still want to talk. He leaves before she can answer, boots clicking across the courtyard stones, unhurried. Like a man who knows the conversation isn't over, because he's the one who decided when it would start again. She stands there a long moment, cold seeping up through her shoes, and for the first time since the Quay, she lets herself ask the question she's been avoiding. What if this was never about a debt at all? She doesn't tell Tristan about Holloway. She tells herself this is strategy, that she needs more information before she brings him a half-formed fear, but some small, honest part of her knows it's something else. It's the same instinct that kept her quiet about Dallin's first 3 loans, the hope that if she just watches the numbers long enough, the problem will resolve itself before anyone else has to know she let it happen. It doesn't resolve itself, nothing ever does, not really, not without someone forcing the column to close. 2 nights later, she's in the records room, past midnight, lamp low, going through the original contract between her brother and Holloway. She requested it from the keep's archivist under the thin pretense of settling the accounts properly, and nobody questioned a clerk wanting to see her own paperwork. She has read it 11 times already. She reads it a 12th. The wax seal at the bottom is wrong. She doesn't know it consciously at first. It's a feeling before it's a fact. The same way she used to feel a column was wrong before she found the error in it. She holds the parchment up to the lamp. The seal bears Holloway's mark, a coiled eel, the same mark she's seen stamped on a dozen documents this past month, while reconciling the keep's outstanding debts. Except the eel on this contract coils left. Every other Holloway seal she's seen this month. And she has seen many. She has gone through every ledger in this keep, with the particular hunger of someone trying to be useful enough to deserve her own freedom. Every other one coils right. Her hands go very still. She fetches 3 more documents bearing Holloway's seal from the keep's own debt records, lays them beside her brother's contract under the lamp, and there it is, plain as a misplaced decimal. 4 eels coiling right, 1 coiling left, and the left coiling one is the only document that put her, specifically, by name, on an auction block. Her brother's signature is on it. She knows his hand, knows the particular lazy loop he puts on his D, a habit from childhood neither of them ever broke. That part's real. But the terms above it, the clause specifying that the debt, should it go unpaid, transfers as labor bond to whichever party purchases it on public auction. That clause doesn't appear in any of the other contracts Holloway has issued. She checks again. 1,100 crowns in unpaid debts across this city, 4 other contracts, and not one of them carries that clause. Only hers does. The thought arrives whole and cold, the way the worst truths always do. Not built up slowly, but simply there, all at once, like a wall she's walked into in the dark. The debt was real. Dalen really did borrow money he couldn't pay back. That part she's certain of, Because she knows her brother and his appetite for easy schemes better than she knows almost anything else in the world. But the clause that put her on that block, the clause built specifically to deliver her, by name, into a public sale where anyone with 1,100 crowns could claim her. Someone added that. Someone wrote it in after the fact, forged a seal close enough to pass a glance but not a count, and waited. She had assumed, since the moment Tristan's coin hit the table, that she was a footnote to her brother's foolishness. An accident of geography. Wrong sister, wrong week, wrong debt come due at the wrong harbor. She was never the footnote. She was the entry the entire document existed to produce. Someone built a debt around her specifically and put her on a public block where she could be bought by anyone. And Tristan, who never explains himself, who pays 1,100 crowns without blinking and then never once touches her hand across a table, knew exactly where to be standing when the bidding opened. Her stomach turns over, slow and sick. Not because the king is the villain of this. Some instinct in her, stubborn and unprovable, refuses that shape entirely. But because if he knew there'd be a forged debt with her name on it, if he knew to be on that quay at that hour, with that exact sum already counted into a bag, then he knew before she did that she was the target. And he let her stand on that block anyway, frozen, counting her own heartbeat, before he stepped in. She sits with the parchment in her lap for a long time, lamp burning low, and feels something she hasn't felt since she was 9 years old and found the first hole in Dalen's story about where the household coin had gone. The particular, specific fury of being the last person in the room to see the shape of her own life. She finds him in the armory at dawn, of all places, checking the edge of a blade against his thumb with the careless precision of a man who's done it 10,000 times. He looks up when she enters and something in his face changes. Not surprise, she realizes. Recognition. He's been waiting for this conversation to happen. He just didn't know which morning it would arrive. You knew, she says. No greeting. She's done with greetings. He sets the blade down. Knew what? Don't. Her voice cracks on the word and she hates it. Hates that her body betrays her even now, even when her mind is perfectly clear. The seal on my brother's contract is forged. The clause that put me on that block doesn't exist in any of Holloway's other debts. Someone built that contract to put me, specifically, on a public auction, at a specific hour, where anyone could buy me. She steps closer. And you were there with exact change. Silence. The kind that confirms more than words would. Yes, Tristan says finally. Flat. No softening. I knew. The honesty should feel like relief. It feels like being struck. How long? 3 days before the auction. He doesn't look away from her, doesn't flinch from it, and she finds she resents that too. She wants him to flinch. Wants some sign this costs him anything. My people intercept correspondence along the eastern trade routes. A forger's hand isn't hard to recognize once you've seen it twice. Then why let it happen? Her voice rises, finally, after weeks of careful, clerkish control. Why let me stand there for 11 hours? Why let me believe my own brother sold me to a stranger when you could have simply stopped it before the Quay? Something hard moves through his face. And tipped the people who built that contract that we knew. Astrid, whoever forged that seal wanted you specifically, sold publicly, bought by someone they could trace. If I'd intervened before the block, they'd have simply tried again somewhere I couldn't watch. So you used me as bait. I made certain that if you were bait, the hook was mine and not theirs. That isn't the same thing as telling me. No, he agrees low. It isn't. A pause longer this time, and when he speaks again, something in his voice has gone rougher, less certain. The first uncertain thing she's heard from him since the harbor. I made a calculation. I weighed your safety against the chance to learn who wants you and why. And I chose the second, and I told myself it was the same as choosing the first, because I never left that quay. I was 40 feet from you the entire time you stood on that block. His jaw works. It wasn't the same. I know that now. It cost you something I had no right to spend. It is, she will think much later, the single most honest thing anyone has said to her since her brother first told her. Eyes down, voice small, that he'd borrowed money he couldn't repay, an apology with no defense folded inside it. It doesn't fix anything. She doesn't expect it to. Who wants me? She says instead, specifically. Not Holloway, he's a moneylender. He wants coin. This isn't his shape of greed. Tristan is quiet a moment. Holloway works for someone. A man I've been at war with in every way that doesn't involve open battle for 11 years. He's tried twice to put someone inside my keep who could report on me from the inside. Both times I caught it before it mattered. His eyes hold hers. You're cleverer than either of those two. You found a forged seal in a stack of legitimate ones at midnight with no one telling you to look. If he'd succeeded in placing you here as his creditor's leverage instead of as my own clerk, you would have been the most dangerous person in this keep within a month. And you wouldn't have even known you were being used to do it. The floor of her certainty that she was a victim, simply, cleanly, a woman wronged by a brother's debt and rescued by a king's whim, tilts and does not come back level. Then what does that make me now? She says. Your clerk, your bait, your... Mine to protect, Tristan says, before she can finish the sentence with something crueler. That part was never a calculation. She doesn't believe him. Not fully, not yet. But for the first time since the harbor, she understands that the question she should be asking isn't, why did he pay twice for a stranger? It's, what was she worth to the people who built that forged contract? And how far will they go now that the first attempt has failed? The wax seal sits on the table between them, one small eel coiling the wrong direction, and she realizes that the real debt in this story was never measured in crowns at all. The accelerant for everything that follows is, fittingly, a column that doesn't balance. It's 3 days after the armory. Astrid is back at the ledgers because work is the only language her hands still trust, and she's cross-referencing every transaction Holloway's network has touched in the past 6 months, hunting for the man behind him the way she'd hunt a misplaced decimal, patiently, alphabetically, refusing to be impressed by anything until the numbers force her to be. She finds him in a shipping manifest, a merchant named Quay listed as financing 3 of Holloway's largest loans, including, buried in a footnote no one else would have bothered reading, the original 1,100 crown loan to her brother, 6 weeks before Dalen ever signed anything. The debt existed before her brother incurred it. Someone funded the loan that would ruin him before he ever asked for it. She sits very still with that fact for a long moment, the way you sit still after nearly stepping off a curb into traffic you didn't see coming. Dalen didn't gamble himself into a debt, she says aloud, to the empty records room, because saying it makes it more real. Someone handed him a debt shaped exactly like the kind of trouble he always gets into, and waited for him to fall into it. She brings this to Tristan within the hour, and watches his face go through something complicated. Not surprise, again, but a deeper, grimmer confirmation, like a man finally seeing the full shape of a wound he'd only felt the edges of before. Corin Ash works for Velmund, he says. Just the name, and something in the room goes colder for it. A warlord 200 miles north who's spent a decade trying to break my hold on the eastern trade routes. He's tried soldiers. He's tried poison, once, badly. This is the first time he's tried. Tristan stops. Tried what? Patience, he says. Which is worse? Soldiers I can meet with soldiers. This, he gestures at the manifest, at the forged seal still sitting where she left it days ago. This is a years-long plan to put a person I'd trust inside my own walls. He didn't choose your brother by accident. Dalen has the exact weaknesses a man like Velmund looks for. Easy to flatter, easy to indept, easy to forgive himself for ruining. They found him. They built the trap around him. You were always the actual target, dropped onto a public auction block where Velmund's people could buy you, claim you as their own asset, and walk you into wherever they pleased, all under cover of a perfectly legal debt sale. Except you bought me first. Except I bought you first. His jaw tightens. Which means Velmund knows by now that his plan failed at the last possible moment by the one man positioned to recognize a forged seal and a fabricated debt before the gavel fell. A beat. He will not let that stand quietly. Men like him don't lose gracefully. He'll either try to take you by force, or he'll try to discredit the purchase. Claim I bought stolen goods, that the debt sale was illegitimate, that you're not free at all, just transferred from one owner to another. And there it is, the second payment, the one the title has been promising since the Quay, finally given its shape and its reason. Astrid feels the whole structure of the last 6 weeks resolve at once, the way a stubborn column finally balances. He didn't pay twice out of guilt, or whim, or even simple decency. He paid the second time because the first payment, the public one, the one everyone saw, could be challenged, contested, picked apart by lawyers and warlords looking for a thread to pull. "You're going to free me," she says slowly, a second time. "Properly, so there's no document anywhere that says I belong to anyone. I should have done it the same hour I bought you." His eyes hold hers, steady, the storm in them finally settled into something that looks almost like grief. "I told myself waiting kept you safer, gave us time to find who was behind this before announcing it to the world. That was another calculation, Astrid, and I made it without asking you, the same as the first one." His voice roughens. "I keep doing that, deciding for you what protects you. It is, I think, the worst habit a king ever learns, and I have had a great many years to learn it." She doesn't forgive him in that sentence, but she hears, underneath the apology, the shape of a man trying to unlearn something that's kept him alive for 11 years of war. And that, too, costs something to say out loud. "Then do it properly this time," she says. "Ask me first." The second payment happens 4 days later, and it is nothing like the first. There's no fog this time, no harbor, no crowd of bored men in wool coats. It happens in the keep's great hall at midday. Sun coming hard and clean through the high windows, every clerk and steward and guard in the building gathered because Tristan summoned them, and Astrid stands at the center of the room in a blue wool dress Bry chose for her. Practical, unornamented, nothing borrowed, and feels her pulse climbing the way it did on the Quay, except this time it isn't fear. She doesn't have a word yet for what it is. Tristan stands across from her with a document in his hand, and Holloway's original contract, the forged one, in the other, and he holds them both up where the room can see. 6 weeks ago, he says, voice carrying without effort, the voice of a man used to being heard, I paid a debt on a public quay to free a woman named Astrid from a contract bearing the seal of Vance Holloway. He sets the contract on the long table. That contract was forged. The debt within it never belonged to her at all. It was built, deliberately, by enemies of this keep, to deliver her into a sale where she could be claimed and used against everyone in this room. A murmur moves through the gathered staff. Astrid feels it like weather. I am declaring, before witnesses, that the original sale was void from its first signature. Astrid was never legally bonded to anyone, not to Holloway, not to me. He sets a second document down, clean, new, sealed in fresh wax, the eel-free, debt-free shape of it almost shocking after weeks of staring at forgeries. This is a declaration of her freedom, witnessed by the keep's full council, recorded in the city registry by sundown today, naming her debt to Holloway null and her person free of any claim, including mine. He looks at her, just her, the rest of the room briefly non-existent to him in a way she's only seen once before, on the Quay. In the 2 seconds he assessed her like a sentence worth reading twice. The first payment freed you from a debt, he says, quieter now, just for her, though the whole hall can still hear it. This one isn't a payment at all. There's nothing left to pay. I wanted there to be a paper in this city that says, plainly, that you belong to no one's ledger, not Holloway's, not Velmund's. A pause, the first real hesitation she's seen from him. Not mine, unless you choose it. It should feel like triumph. Mostly, it feels like grief. Clean, sharp, surprising grief. For the version of herself who stood on that Quay 11 hours, believing the worst thing that could happen to her was being sold. When the worst thing, it turns out, was almost being used as a weapon against her own choices without ever knowing it. She signs the document. Her hand is steady. Her chest is not. "Why twice?" she says again. With a question that's followed her since the fog lifted off that harbor. And this time, she means it differently than she did on the quay. This time, she's asking him to actually answer it. Tristan's mouth does something that isn't quite a smile. "Because the first time I paid for a stranger," he says, "and I didn't know yet what I was buying. The second time, I knew exactly who I was setting free. There's a difference between owning a debt and choosing a person, Astrid. I wanted you to have proof, in writing, witnessed, that I understand which one this is." The hall has gone very quiet. Somewhere near the back, Bry has gone still in a way that, on her, looks like restrained pride. And Astrid, who has spent her whole life balancing other people's columns, finds that for the first time there's a number in front of her she has no idea how to calculate. Not a debt, not a sum, but the precise weight of being chosen by someone who already knew her worth before he reached for the coin. She doesn't say it costs nothing. It doesn't. Freedom rarely does. But for the first time since the fog lifted off the quay, she lets herself believe the number might, eventually, come out in her favor. Velman's response arrives 9 days later, and it does not come as soldiers. It comes as a letter, sealed, delivered to the keep's gate by a courier who refuses to give his name and is gone before anyone thinks to stop him. Addressed not to Tristan, but to Astrid by name, in handwriting she's never seen before and somehow recognizes anyway. The particular slanted confidence of a man who's never once doubted his own cleverness. She reads it alone, in the records room, because some part of her still believes problems are easier solved without an audience. "You found the seal. I'll admit I underestimated you. Most clerks see what a document tells them to see. You looked at what it didn't say. That's rarer than I accounted for, and I do not enjoy being wrong about people. It has cost me very little in my life, which is exactly why I notice when it happens. Your brother is currently a guest in my household. He arrived 3 weeks before the auction, on the promise of a modest loan to settle a gambling debt he had not yet incurred. A kindness I extended early, you might say, in anticipation of his needs. He's comfortable. He has not been harmed. He has also signed several documents he did not read closely, which I am sure does not surprise you, knowing him as you do. I would like him back to you, whole, with no further obligation attached. In exchange, I require one thing, that you walk away from Tristan's keep within the month, of your own choice, with no coercion on my part required. I am told you value choices freely made. Consider this one entirely yours. Refuse, and your brother's comfort becomes considerably more negotiable. You have a fortnight. There is no signature. There doesn't need to be. Astrid sits with the letter a long time, the cedar and iron smell of the room suddenly too thin to steady her, and feels something she hasn't felt since the night she found the forged seal, the specific vertigo of a column that refuses, no matter how many times she runs it, to balance. Because here is the arithmetic, plain and merciless as anything she's ever calculated. If she stays, her brother, foolish, careless, the only family she has left in the world, pays for it in a currency she can't measure from here. If she leaves, walks away clean and visible the way Velman demands, Dahlen comes home, and the price is a number she actually understands. Herself, traded out of this, keep the same way she was almost traded into one. There is no version of this where the numbers come out even. She has spent her whole life trusting that somewhere, if she looked hard enough, the columns would always resolve. This is the first time she's faced one that simply won't. She doesn't bring the letter to Tristan first. That's the part that will haunt her later, the part she'll turn over for months. That her first instinct, even now, even after everything, is still to solve it alone, before anyone else can tell her she did the math wrong. She finds Dalin's old room first. Empty, of course, untouched since the auction. His coat still hanging on the peg where he left it the morning. He disappeared instead of standing beside her on that quay. And she stands in the doorway a long moment with the letter in her fist, feeling something crack open in her chest that has nothing to do with calculation. He left her there. She's known that since the fog lifted, has known it in the careful, locked-away way she knows most painful things, filed and shelved and never reopened. But knowing a thing and feeling it arrive fully in your chest are not the same event. And they arrive now, together, in this small, cold room smelling of dust and someone else's cologne. She finds Tristan in the armory again. It seems to be where he goes to think. Blades and oil and the particular silence of a room built for violence that none is currently happening in. And she puts the letter in his hand without a word, because she's run out of words that feel like enough. He reads it twice. She watches his jaw work the second time through, watches something dangerous move behind those storm, undecided eyes. He's bluffing about one thing, Tristan says finally. Velmund doesn't actually want you gone. If he simply wanted you away from me, he'd have engineered a quieter exit weeks ago. A job offer somewhere distant, a fabricated family emergency, something that wouldn't announce itself with a letter and a deadline. He wants you to choose to leave, publicly, so it looks like rejection instead of extraction. He's not just removing a clerk from my household. His voice goes low. He's trying to prove that I can be made to lose something I want, and that I'll let it happen rather than fight for it. This isn't about your brother at all, Astrid. Dalen is the hook. You walking away on your own feet is the message. Then what would you do? She means it as a real question, not rhetorical, and hears her own voice crack slightly on. Do. The first crack she's allowed since the second freedom papers were signed. I'd refuse the trade, Tristan says immediately, hard. I'd send men north tonight, and take your brother back by force and let Velmund choke on the consequence. And if that gets Dalen killed before your men arrive, if it confirms exactly what Velmund wants confirmed, that the king doesn't actually let the people around him choose anything, that he simply takes whatever outcome he prefers and calls it protection? She hears the echo of her own earlier accusation in her words and watches it land on his face. You did that to me once already, on the Quay. You decided what kept me safest without asking, and it cost me 11 hours I'll never get back. His silence this time is the longest yet. You're right, he says finally, low, like the words cost him something physical to produce. I don't have a calculation that solves this cleanly. I have only ever solved problems by deciding, alone, what I was willing to lose. I don't know how to do it the other way. A pause, and when he looks at her, the storm in his eyes has finally fully broken. Tell me what you need, and I will not make this decision for you. Not this time. It is, she realizes, the precise apology she didn't know she was still waiting for. Not the words from the great hall, polished and witnessed and put down on paper. But this, a king admitting, in a cold armory, that he doesn't have the answer and won't pretend he does just to feel useful. She doesn't have the answer either. That's the part that terrifies her most. The plan she builds over the next 3 days is not, strictly speaking, a plan. It's a gamble dressed in the clothes of one, and she knows the difference better than anyone, because gambling is the exact thing that put her on that Quay in the first place. Her brother's appetite for bets he couldn't cover, multiplied now into something with teeth. But here is what she does know how to count. Velmund wants her to walk away, visibly, publicly, so the story that travels north is the librarian's clerk chose to leave the king rather than stay and be used as leverage. If she gives him that story exactly as he's written it, Dalen comes home and she loses everything she's built in this keep over 6 weeks of ledgers and careful trust. If she refuses outright, Her brother may die for a point of pride that was never fully hers to make. So she builds a third option, the kind that doesn't exist in any column she's ever balanced. Not refusal, not compliance, but a forgery of her own. "I'll go," she tells Tristan, the morning of the deadline, in the records room where this entire reversal began. Publicly, visibly. "I'll walk out of this keep's front gate alone, no guard, exactly the way Velman's letter demands, so that whatever courier he has watching reports back precisely what he wants to hear." Tristan's face goes very still. "Astrid, I'm not finished." Her voice doesn't shake. It's the steadiest she's been since the auction block. "I'll walk to the harbor. Not north, not toward Velman's territory. The harbor, the same quay I was sold on. Because it's the one place in this city Holloway's network watches most carefully. And Holloway works for Velmund, which means whatever happens there gets reported north within the hour. And I'll wait there, alone, for exactly long enough for someone to try to collect me." Her chest is tight. This is the part with no calculation behind it, no column, no certainty. "Because the only way to prove to Velmund that taking me by force is a mistake is to let him try it somewhere. Your men are already positioned and he doesn't know it. You want to use yourself as bait again. I want to choose it this time," she says, hard. "That's the entire difference, isn't it? You said it yourself. There's a difference between owning a debt and choosing a person. I'm choosing this. I need you to let me, even though every instinct you have is built to stop me." He doesn't answer immediately. When he does, his voice is rough in a way she hasn't heard from him before, not the controlled rasp of a king delivering a verdict. Something closer to a man watching the floor move under feet he thought were planted. "If I say yes," he says, "and it goes wrong, I will spend the rest of my life knowing I let it happen with my eyes open." "If you say no," she answers, "I'll spend the rest of my life knowing you decided again, without asking, what I was allowed to risk for my own brother. I already know which version of that I can live with less." His jaw works once, twice, the same small, swallowed motion she'll think of later as the precise shape of a man choosing trust over certainty for the first time in 11 years of war. "Then we do it your way," he says. "But you are not standing on that quay alone. My men will be close enough to reach you in under a minute, hidden, and you will wear something under your dress that I am about to show you. And you will not, under any circumstance, go anywhere with anyone before that minute is up. A beat. That's not me deciding for you. That's me asking you to let me protect the part of this I'm allowed to. It's not full surrender on either side. It's something better. A negotiation between two people who've both learned, recently and painfully, what it costs to decide alone." She agrees. The fortnight ends in 4 days. The numbers, finally, however imperfectly, agree to be run. The Quay, the second time, smells exactly the same, rust and low tide and something colder underneath, the particular gray hour before the sun fully commits to rising. And Astrid stands on the same wooden boards where she once counted her own heartbeat to keep from screaming, and notices, with a kind of grim humor she didn't know she still had in her, that fear apparently has a favorite location. She's alone, visibly, deliberately alone, no guard in sight, exactly as the letter demanded, exactly as the story Velmund wants told requires. Underneath her dress, a thin mail vest Tristan's armorer fitted her for in under an hour, light enough to move in, heavy enough that she felt the weight of it the entire walk down from the keep like a second pulse. Somewhere in the fog, she doesn't know exactly where, that's the design. That's the entire point. Tristan's men wait close enough to reach her in under a minute. 60 seconds is a very long time to stand still on a quay where you've already been sold once. She doesn't have to wait long. A man steps out of the fog at the harbor's edge. Not Holloway, someone she doesn't recognize, broad through the shoulders with a burn scar twisting up the left side of his neck like old rope, and he's smiling the way Holloway smiled in the courtyard, like the outcome is already decided, and he's simply walking toward it. Astrid. Her name again tasted the same way. You came alone. That's good sense. I came because my brother's life is worth more to me than my pride. She keeps her voice level. It costs her everything she has. Where is he? Safe. He'll stay that way the moment you walk toward that boat instead of back toward that keep. He gestures and she sees it now. A small craft moored at the end of the dock, 2 more men aboard, the fog thick enough to swallow it within 100 feet of pulling out. Velmund keeps his promises. Unlike kings. He forged a debt with my brother's signature on it, she says, and watches the man's smile falter, just slightly surprise flickering through it. Did he tell you that part? That none of this, the auction, the contract, my brother's debt, was ever real until your employer built it to be? Doesn't matter what's real. The man takes a step closer. Matters what you choose, right now. It matters to me. She holds his gaze. Because I've spent 4 years balancing other people's lies into something that looks like the truth. And I am very, very good at recognizing exactly when a number has been forced to fit an answer someone wanted in advance. Her heart is going so hard she can feel it in her teeth. You're not here to take me to my brother. There is no boat ride to Velmund's territory that ends with both of us free. You're here to take me somewhere I can be used, the same as the first time. And I think some part of you already knows that, because you haven't actually told me where Dallin is, have you? Not a city, not a house, nothing I could verify. The man's jaw tightens. It's a small thing. It's enough. Last chance, he says, voice harder now, the patience burning off him fast. Walk to the boat. And here is the moment with no column to check it against, no ledger to balance it first. The uncalculated leap. The one thing in her whole life she cannot run the numbers on before committing, because the variable she's betting everything on is trust, and trust does not show its work in advance. No, Astrid says. The man lunges. She doesn't fight him. She was never going to win that fight, and she knows it, has known it since she agreed to stand on this quay. She simply drops, hard, to the wet boards, exactly the way the armorer drilled into her over 4 rushed sessions, making herself dead weight, buying 1 second, 2, and the fog breaks open with men. It happens faster than she can track. Tristan's guards, closing from 3 directions at once, the burn-scared man going down under 2 of them before he's fully registered the ambush, shouts, the wet slap of boots on dock boards, and through all of it, Tristan himself, blade already drawn, moving toward her, not toward the fight, his pale storm-colored eyes locked on her face the entire way, like she's the only fixed point in a harbor full of chaos. He reaches her before she's fully back on her feet. His hands close around her arms, the first time he has touched her, truly touched her, since the cloak on this exact quay 6 weeks ago, and for 1 suspended second, neither of them says anything at all, just the fog and the gulls and her own ragged breathing and his hands, steady, anchoring, refusing to let go. You're hurt, he says rough. I'm not. Her voice comes out smaller than she means it to. I did the math wrong on one thing. What? I thought I'd be less afraid the second time. A laugh escapes her, cracked and not entirely steady. I wasn't. I was exactly as afraid as the first time. I just decided to stand there anyway. Something breaks open in his face at that. Not relief. Something rawer. Closer to the thing she's watched him guard against since the morning he first laughed over a misaligned ledger. He doesn't say anything else. He simply pulls her in, careful, like she's something he's afraid of breaking and equally afraid of not holding, and she lets him, fog and harbor, and the wreckage of someone else's failed plan settling around them both, and thinks, distantly, that this is the first column in her entire life she didn't need to check twice to believe. They find Dallin 4 days later, not in Velmund's territory at all, but in a rented room, 2 streets back from the very harbor where Astrid was sold, kept comfortable, kept compliant, kept exactly close enough that the threat in Velmund's letter would always have been hollow theater. A man who never intended to risk a hostage 200 miles from where the leverage was actually needed. He's thinner than she remembers. He's also infuriatingly apologetic in exactly the soft performative way she's watched her whole life. Eyes down, voice small, the particular tone he's used since they were children, whenever he wanted forgiveness handed to him faster than he'd earned it. Astrid. He reaches for her hands the moment the door opens, the way he always does, assuming the reunion will smooth everything underneath it flat. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know what they'd do with the contract. I thought it was just a loan. You signed a contract you didn't read. She doesn't pull her hands away, but she doesn't grip back either. And she watches him register the absence of that grip like a verdict. Again. The same thing you did at 16 with the grain merchant. The same thing you did at 20 with the horse trader. You have done this exact thing 4 times in our lives, Dallin, and 4 times I have been the one standing in the wreckage doing the math on what it cost. That's not fair, It's the only fair thing I've said to you in years. Her voice doesn't rise. It doesn't need to. I almost died on an auction block because you signed something without checking whose name was on the clause underneath yours. I am not telling you this to punish you. I'm telling you because I need you to actually hear it. Once, instead of watching me forgive you before you've finished apologizing. Dallin's face does something complicated. Shame, genuine this time, not the performed kind. And underneath it something that looks almost like fear of who his sister has become in 6 weeks away from him. She doesn't disown him. That's not the ending this story is owed. And some part of her, the part that still remembers him, teaching her to read tax columns at a kitchen table when their parents couldn't afford a tutor, refuses to let it be. But she also doesn't let him move back into the keep with her. Doesn't pay his next debt before he's even finished explaining it. Doesn't do the thing she's done her entire life, which is solve his problems faster than he can finish causing them. Get work, she tells him instead. Real work. Somewhere I'm not watching the ledger for you. If you do that for a year, a full year, Dallin, not 3 months and a relapse, we'll talk about what comes after. She finally lets her hand close around his once brief. I love you. That was never the part in question. But I'm done being the column that balances your mistakes for you. It's not a clean resolution. It's not supposed to be. Some debts, she's learning, don't clear all at once. They get paid down slowly in installments of honesty, the same as anything else worth keeping. Holloway is arrested within the week. The forged seal, once Tristan's counsel examines it formally, unravels the rest of his ledgers fast. Debts he'd manufactured against at least 3 other families besides her own, each one engineered the same patient way, each one waiting for a desperate signature to make the theft look legal. He does not grovel prettily. He tries, in fact, to bargain, offers names, offers routes, offers anything that might buy him out of the rope he's clearly imagining around his own neck. And Tristan, standing in judgment with the same level voice he used on the Quay the morning he bought her, simply says, "You sold a person who was never yours to sell. There isn't a name you can give me worth more than that." Astrid watches it happen from the back of the hall, arms crossed, and feels something settle in her chest that isn't triumph exactly. It's closer to the specific satisfaction of watching a column, after weeks of refusing to balance, finally close clean. Velmund himself she never sees. He stays 200 miles north, untouchable behind his own walls, and the letter he sent her becomes, in the end, the only piece of him that ever crosses her path again. Evidence, filed, witnessed, one more forged thread in a plot that failed at every single point he expected it to succeed. Tristan tells her, weeks later, that the war between them continues exactly as it has for 11 years, slow and grinding and far from over. Then nothing's actually finished, she says. No, he agrees. Some debts don't finish. They just stop being the ones that decide who you are. The keep, 6 weeks after the harbor, smells the way it did the first night she arrived. Wood smoke, tallow, faint lavender from the linen press, except now it smells like something else too, underneath. something she's only recently learned to name, like a place that's hers, not borrowed, not bought, not owed to anyone. She finds Tristan on the same long table where she once corrected a steward's bad math in 4 minutes flat, except this time there's no ledger between them, no document, no forged seal waiting to be uncovered. Just him, and the late light through the high windows, and the particular quiet of a question that's been sitting unasked for 6 weeks, because neither of them knew yet how to count its cost. "You never actually answered me," she says, "on the Quay. Why me, out of everyone on that block?" He's quiet a long moment. When he answers, it isn't the careful weighted answer of a king choosing his words for effect. It's rougher than that, more honest. "Because the moment my men told me a forged contract was about to put a stranger on a public auction block, I expected to feel obligated, dutiful, the way I feel about most of the threats against this keep." His eyes hold hers, steady, no storm left undecided in them now. "Instead, I stood in that fog and watched you hold your chin level while 50 men decided your price, and I felt something I had not let myself feel in 11 years of deciding things alone." A pause, the first genuinely unguarded one she's seen from him. "I paid the second time because I needed there to be a version of this story where you were never anyone's purchase at all. Not even mine. I needed it on paper because I was terrified that if I didn't put it there in writing, some part of me would always wonder if you only stayed because you felt you owed it. And now? Now I'm asking," he says, "instead of deciding. Stay because you choose to. Not because of a debt, not because of a bond. Not because there's a paper somewhere that says you should." His voice roughens. "Stay because some mornings I'd rather hand you a ledger than anyone else in this kingdom, and I am finished pretending that's only about the numbers." She doesn't answer immediately. She thinks of the Quay, the fog, the gull's single scream, and then silence. She thinks of 1,100 crowns hitting a table twice, and a forged eel coiling the wrong direction, and her brother's small, lazy looped signature underneath a lie he never wrote himself. She thinks of every column she has ever balanced in her life, and how this is the first one that was never going to add up cleanly no matter how many times she ran it. Because love, it turns out, isn't a sum. It's a choice you make again each morning, the way she's choosing right now, to reach across a table that no longer has a ledger on it and put her hand, finally, fully, in his. "I'm not free because you paid for me," she says. "I'm free because I get to choose what I do with it, and I'm choosing this." His hand closes around hers, and outside, faint and far off, a gull calls once over the harbor and goes quiet. The same sound. She realizes that marked the worst hour of her life. Now simply the sound of a city going on, indifferent and ordinary, while inside this room, for the first time since the fog lifted off that Quay, she finally stops counting.